We've got 6 layers that are misrepresenting us, but in that 7th layer, I hear every magical sound in a voice that's not being revealed. Why is it not being revealed? Because of those 5 wounds and because of the things that we've been told.
I gotta get myself a little more faith, a little more love.
I'm your host, Christa, and I'm going to guess we have at least one thing in common, that we're both in pursuit of a less stressed life. On this show, I'll be interviewing experts and sharing clinical pearls from my years of practice to support high-performing, health-savvy women in pursuit of abundance and a less stressed life. One of my beliefs is that we always have options for getting the results we want, so let's see what's out there together.
Just keep breaking. I gotta get myself a little more faith, a little more love.
All right, today on The Less Stressed Life, I have voice researcher and coach Tracy Goodwin, who is owner of Captivate the Room and creator of Psychology of the Voice. She's taught thousands of celebrities, professionals, and entrepreneurs to transform their voices from the inside out with their unique approach, which gets to the core of a person's internal voice psychology and external sounds that are repelling, misrepresenting, and costing them 30 to 90% in impact, influence, and revenue. Tracy makes the invisible visible to next level your relationships, business, and overall success. She's the host of an award-winning podcast and a highly sought-after speaker around the globe. Welcome, Tracy.
Hey, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah. I met Tracy in the last 6, I don't know, the time runs together, but somehow I saw her at a conference, actually maybe last December. A friend introduced me to her, and then I saw her some other places. And long story short, she had audited my voice, which I found quite fun, quite interesting. And I am a person who likes personality type things, or not as much at the moment, but I've come from a place where I like personality type things because they help you understand each other. And I feel like what Tracy does is a different level of that. So she's going to share a little bit. I just think it's so interesting. And so I can't wait for her to unpack this psychology of the voice. I would love to hear a little bit about your background, and because your field feels a bit unicorn, right? And at the same point, you do get mistaken as a voice coach, which is a little, maybe that's the right term, but you get mistaken, your career gets mistaken a little bit. So let's unpack both of those things. Will you tell me how you got into what you're doing now, that story to where we are and how we got to sitting here? And then we'll talk about how this gets misrepresented sometimes.
Yeah, sure. When people are often fascinated with, how in the world did you pick this? How did you get into this? And my response might surprise you. My response is kicking and screaming like a mule being dragged through the mud, because I couldn't imagine that this was what I was here on this planet to do because of the way my upbringing. Many people are familiar with the concept of children are to be seen and not heard. And mine was an extreme version of that. In fact, many times I'll say I was raised in a family where I wasn't allowed to speak, which is pretty close to the truth. I was the 4th of 4, and apparently I was a rebellious one. And I really think that my mom was just tired by that time. So it was just really easy to say, you never can say no. You never express any emotion. In fact, don't say anything. Just sit there and look pretty, is how I was raised. And then, so I became a speaker and an actor when I was still a teenager. I was traveling all over the country speaking because that gave me a platform to be heard. And I wanted to be an actor. And I was an actor, but in the very early 20s when I was being an actor, people kept finding me to coach their voices. And this was Yellow Pages days. And this is like major corporations. And I'm thinking, this is bizarre, but I'll do it. We'll do it. I don't want to do this. I don't think this is what I'm supposed to do. But deep down, I knew it was what I was supposed to do. I focused primarily on dialects in the early years of my career. I taught dialects to actors. Let me back up. I got sick of being an actor and just started doing the voice work, even though back then I was doing traditional voice coaching. Hearing the way that I hear, doing traditional voice coaching, and I taught actors dialects for movies, and I took dialects away from business people. That's what we used to do. And people were finding me, and I'm doing this work begrudgingly. And then one day I started wondering, why do the Irish sound Irish and I sound Texan? And it was in that deep dive that I figured out what I do today, 30 years later, that the subconscious actually controls how we use our voice. And our voice is dramatically formed by the experiences we have and the things people say to us. So once I did that first research study, then I was obsessed. But I definitely was Jonah in the belly of the whale. I was not going to Nineveh.
Yeah. I'm so curious about this because the way you told your story is very resonant with what I feel many women might say. And even through my own coaching this year, I felt like I actually found my voice in that I was really holding a lot of things in that I wanted to say. And so I'm actually just so curious about even how you got into, if you were in a home where you should not speak, I wonder if you took it as I am going to, or if you had lost your voice for a while. Do you know what I'm asking?
I think so. And I definitely lost mine. If we look at the body of work that I've done now, I can look back and say being on stage, being an actor was all performance, and it was all a performance mask. But if we look at the catastrophic things that happened in my life up until I really started doing this work, there would be no question that I had been silenced and that I had lost my voice, which is really so many people. So many people have been silenced, and we create accommodations through things that we do with our voice because we don't. In the 7 layers of sound that I hear, the real voice is buried in layer 7. So when people go, well, just be authentic, just go people don't even know what that means because they've spent so much time creating a voice that will be received. You said the thing earlier about not being a voice coach, and people will say, don't call yourself a voice coach. That's not what you do. I do work with the vehicle of the voice, but I feel like what I do is take away the voice the world said people had to have and get them back to the voice that they were born with. Because even somebody like me that was silenced very early on, I was still born with an authentic voice, with a real, powerful, dynamic voice.
Yeah, that's what I heard in that, is that you help people master their authenticity so they can live aligned instead of feeling like they're maybe an imposter. And sometimes, I'm sure we've all felt that way. Sometimes when we've been in a career and needed to speak on a topic, or because confidence comes from experiences, like you were saying in a different way, is like we are who we are because of the experiences we have in our life, which shows up. It's just interesting because we know some of this in other ways, but you're bringing it in this lens of the voice. And so even though I could ask you 12,000 more questions about how you ended up where you are now, you brought up this layers of sound. But maybe we should unpack. There's a term that you use all the time, psychology of the voice. I think maybe I should start there. Is that the right place? Can you define psychology of the voice, please?
Sure. And psychology of the voice and the 7 layers of sound are still big parts of my story. But when I was working with dialects, and I had that fascination with why doesn't everybody sound the same? When I really figured out how a dialect is created, I understood that words come in. The Irish baby's parents speak to the Irish baby. The information comes in the ear. And a lot of this, I was incorporating the training that I'd had in dialects and the masters that I'd been able to study with. And then the subconscious takes that information in, that sound, and literally tells the muscles of the face how to hold what I call a placement. So all I have to do is shift my placement and I can sound Irish. All right. And I thought, so hold on. All right. That makes sense. That makes perfect sense because the Irish baby needs to belong to the Irish family. And I thought, okay, is this bigger than this? And I started looking at the clients I was working with, and every one of them had these massive, what I call voice stories, where someone they care deeply about said things to them, like Bill, whose sisters were constantly saying, Bill, you're too loud, get out of our room. And he came to work with me because he had this teeny tiny little voice. So I figured out in that moment that what the psychology of the voice is, the information comes in, the subconscious creates stories and ways of being and multiple other things. It is the psychology we have around our voice. And then that is embedded in the muscle memory of the voice, which a lot of people don't realize. You can do 15 years of therapy, but that voice, because it is our instrument of identity, is going to hold that sound, which is ultimately protection. So psychology of the voice is really, in a nutshell, what is happening internally that is the driver of the sounds you're revealing externally.
So interesting. Okay. So what's happening internally, driving the sounds we're hearing externally, and you hear several layers of that, right?
I do. I hear 7 layers of sound in every voice. When I was probably in my 20s, maybe up into my early 30s, I thought everybody could hear the way that I can hear. And I did a training, and a young man rattled off a role play, and I said, "Oh, I get it. You fell in love with a girl and she broke your heart. You moved down here to Texas because you wanted to be with her, but y'all broke up and you don't know what you're going to do. You think you're going to move back to Maryland, but you aren't really sure." I just went on. And he said, "How did you know that?" And I said, "Did I get it right?" And he said, "Yes." And I looked around the room and I said, "Did y'all hear what I just said?" And they said, "Now we do." So that led me on a 10-year study. So it was then that I realized, okay, people are not hearing the depth of the 7 layers. But then I did a 10-year study to find out if what I'm hearing and identifying is what they are processing subconsciously, which is the second part of the work. But in those 7 layers, I hear 6 layers of what I call voice masks. They are sounds that misrepresent you. They are sounds that protect you. They are sounds that come off of what I now know is 5 wounds. Because when I hear sound, I'm chasing the why behind the sound. So I can get to the bottom of what's the driver of that sound. And it's always one of 5 wounds. So we've got 6 layers that are misrepresenting us. But in that 7th layer, I hear every magical sound in a voice that's not being revealed. Why is it not being revealed? Because of those 5 wounds and because of the things that we've been told. I don't want to be judged. They said I'm too much. I don't want to be judged. I'll tone it down. Judgment, rejection, abandonment, sense of belonging, and worthiness. And those are things that were developed, many of them before we're 5. But then we live in the world. So we have relationships and business partners and all the things. And all of this is created around what is spoken to us. So think about it. Think about the things that have been spoken to you. They create wounds. So that's what the 7 layers is. And I don't have a lot of friends because people are always like, "Are you listening? Are you analyzing? Are you analyzing right now?" And I do turn it off, but I can instantly hear, this is why you're not selling. This is why they're not buying. This is what they're interpreting. And that's generally, quite often, not the truth of what the person feels.
Yeah.
But that sound is buried in the muscle memory of the voice.
So there's an expression that is success leaves clues. And my interpretation of it is that there's common denominators. And so it's so fun because I am interviewing you today because I knew you. I find this topic interesting. And as you talk, it feels a lot like sometimes if we're doing root cause work, we're going to the root of the root, or even these wounds that you bring up, something I think sometimes when we get into our career, we don't realize what else is going to come up. And so I'll joke that I was not prepared for the level of anxiety that I was working with on the other side of the table when I started working with gut health, for example. And when I started doing breath work and coaching, I was starting to see that the real core issues were issues around worthiness. Now, people wouldn't come up and say that. They would never say, "Oh, I have an issue with a sense of belonging or worthiness." They would not say that, but it was what was revealed to the rest of the discussion. And as you unpack it, that's what it really was. And as you do a body work, like breath work, sometimes it would come out as tears or something like that, right? Because it was a pain. So it makes so much sense that you bring up these wounds. I see these in a totally different way, through a totally different lens. That makes sense. So with these layers of the voice, we don't necessarily have to go through every layer by any means, but I'm curious, did you develop these layers, or is there, because I don't know anything about science of voice, and you did a lot of study plus your own study and research. So therefore, were these voice masks or layers documented anywhere else? Or did you find them anywhere and say,
No.
I am seen here? No. So
No. No, I've never seen another human talk about the 7 layers. I've never seen any research. And a lot of the psychology of the research is mine. There's a little bit out there, but more of the research. There's a really great study that was done out of Stanford University. It's similar, but not. It was actually done on surgeons. And they brought, I think it was 100 surgeons. They took 100 surgeons, 50 of whom had malpractice suits. And they gave them all a script, and they had them all record the exact same words. They garbled the sound. And then they brought in a test audience to hear these recordings of blah, 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 blah. And with almost 100% accuracy, the test audience could say who had been sued. That's the closest thing I've ever seen to the work that I do. But I chased patterns to discover this. Actually, one time I was talking to a coach of mine, and she said, wait, what did you just say? I said, oh yeah, here's 7 layers of sound. And she said, I've known you 10 years. I've never heard you say that. I used to not even talk about it. I just knew this is what's first, that has to be removed. Then I get to that, then I get to that. And by that process, I noticed consistently the bottom of the bottom was always worth. The top of the top was always, I could tell the person what they were thinking about. It was 2 or 3 things coming from, they were in their head, or character traits are always layers 1 through 3. I can instantly say, you're outcome-driven problem solver, no nonsense, aren't you? And the person will go, yeah, how'd you know? That's all over the top layer of your sound. Or in multiple character traits, or you're thinking about what I'm thinking about, or you're thinking about the past, or you're trying to get the words right. Those are always, every single time, the first sounds that hit me. After that, every single time, it was a series of the various voice masks were always the next set of sounds that I heard. And that never wavered in hundreds and hundreds of people. So that was really, wasn't so much a research study, but it was more of a data collection that, okay, consistently, this is what people are leading with vocally. This is what follows. And then these wounds, I can identify as the supporting, that's the foundation.
Okay. I understood the top layer, but I just want to understand the middle. You said there's a series of various voice masks, and those can be all over the place, would you say?
It is hot weather season, and there is probably no better time than now to make electrolytes part of your daily routine. Electrolytes help you make energy and help get hydration into the cell so you aren't just peeing out what you put in. I've been drinking electrolytes for at least 5 years, and I'm always looking for a great tasting, high quality powder just to change up the flavors. This summer, I'm doing a lot of Electrolyte Supreme from Jigsaw. It's got a great complementary vitamin and mineral profile beyond the classic electrolyte minerals of potassium, sodium, and magnesium without any sugar or artificial colors. It tastes great, and it's probably my go-to for my kids, especially the lemon lime flavor of the hydrating lemonade for summer. You can get 10% off every single order at jigsawhealth.com with the code LESSSTRESSED10. That's LESSSTRESSED10 to take 10% off of all of Jigsaw's incredible products, from Electrolyte Supreme to potassium and adrenal cocktails to cod liver oil and beyond. So go get yourself now and start hydrating.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've identified about somewhere between 13 and 17 what I call voice masks. And again, a consistent sound that is coming from a behavior. So my first mask is needing to prove. And I figured this one out working with a man. He said, I want to come work with you. I think I'm repelling customers. I said, you are. He said, how do you know? I said, what are you trying to prove? There was a dominant sound of, I have to prove to you that I'm good enough. And he said to me, he said, I can't believe you said that to me. I've spent my whole life trying to prove my worth to my father. So there was a voice story that created a patterning in the voice where when he was with his dad, he had to prove. When he was going into sales calls, he was having to prove. So it doesn't mean it's always like that, but circumstances trigger the voice wounds, the voice stories, and the voice masks. It can be sales for many people. It could be introduce yourself, can put a mask on somebody in an instant. It can be the scary, intimidating people came in the room. It can be the competition came in the room. All these things. And I say pick up. We don't pick them up literally because they are invisible, but they're an invisible armor of sounds that keep people out and keep us safe. They totally block connection, but they come off of an outside trigger that affects an inside wound. And everybody's got them.
Yeah.
And it could be the people pleaser mask. It could be the cheerleader mask. It could be performer, do not bother, or any combination of them at various circumstances.
Yeah. Super interesting. So will you share a story? You just started to share the story about the man proving himself. Will you share a little bit of a story about maybe someone, if it's possible, someone you worked with and you identified their mask, and then how did it go? I don't know what you want to share about how you helped them with it, because that's the next thing. It's, oh, wow. It's helping someone get to we do this work in therapy or coaching to try to figure out our history. And then Tracy listens to his voice and is, I think this is what's going on for you. And that gentleman, he may have been able to verbalize it to you because you had heard it, but sometimes we can't always come to someone and say, this is what I think my issue is. Anyway, which is fun, fascinating, super cool. It's just like a really interesting, unique angle on this. But can you tell us a story about someone that maybe just any story that comes to mind recently that was fun for you? Someone you worked with and what was cleared, and maybe whatever you want to share about that process, just to take us through a little bit of a case study.
Yeah. Gosh, so many. And I was thinking about doing one on a people pleaser.
Sounds resonant.
But that's a good one. But I also have a really good one about cheerleader mask on the front end. This was an entrepreneur. I'll jump into this one if it's short enough. You want me to do the other one? I can.
Of course.
This is something so what we do as humans is we copy. We have a nature to want to copy what we think will make us successful or make us good or make us fit in. So oftentimes when I work with entrepreneurs who are doing webinars, who are doing launches, who are doing digital things, I will find, and this ended up being another research study on retention, I will find that people are listening to other people and how they start their training. And they start often really ramped up, like, welcome, I'm so glad you're here. This is going to be a great training. And I was working with a woman, she's an 8-figure entrepreneur, and she came out of the gate like that. And I said, whoa, what are you doing? And she said, I'm supposed to do this, right? I'm supposed to be ramped up. And I said, I don't know who told you that, but that's not who you are. You're not ramped up ever. And so you're establishing immediately a false representation of who you are because you saw somebody do it and you think they're successful. We could break that down for days. Maybe that is who they are, but maybe that's not what made them successful. But I see people do this all the time. Or maybe they get bad information. I don't know. But anyway, I said, okay, you're not going to come out of the gate like that anymore. How would it be if your doorbell rang right now and you opened the door and I was there? Sometimes this one backfires on me because sometimes people will go, how do you know where I live? But most of the time, people will then go into this real life level of excitement that's not fabricated, that's not false. And that was one of the things that I did, was I got her coming out of the gate authentically. And coming out of the gate is crucial because you've got 13 seconds. But then I went and did the same study with 3 more 8-figure entrepreneurs that were doing the same thing, none of which is who they were. And every single one of them, what came out of it was their retention problems were solved. People stayed through their whole training. Their conversions went up significantly. So it was like best launch ever. Simply we can move one sound out and increase money or change relationships. But that was one thing that was super easy. And she was just wearing the voice mask of cheerleader. And that was just not who she was. And now more than ever, this was years ago when I worked with her, it was a handful of years ago, but now more than ever, that is not going to work because people are seeking connection and authenticity above everything else. You know, the peacekeeper, I call them peacekeepers because somebody told me one time, I don't think these people like you calling them people pleasers. but that's what it is. She was losing big money deals because she was neutralizing everything. I don't know what they want me to be. So I'll just sound indifferent. So she was delivering. It was coming down to her and another gal for $1 million deals. And she was losing them all the time because had made this decision she had created this voice story that said, I'm too much for them. So she was going in, keeping them happy. Don't rock the boat. And they're over there thinking, she's not passionate enough for our deals. So we had to get her, one, working with the real vocal energy that she has, and two, bringing in the excitement and the way she felt about what she was pitching. Changed everything.
Yeah.
This is just sound we're working with. There's so much that I think people don't even realize, so much weight, power that sound. It's how people decide who we are.
I have a couple of thoughts. The first one is you were talking about how you didn't say I love patterns, but that's how I'm going to interpret it. You were really looking at patterns with voice again and again. And I love that because I always feel that way as well. I love patterns. I'm obsessed with looking for patterns. And I remember interviewing someone on Chinese face mapping, I think, or maybe it was tongue read. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But I was talking to her about how we came to agree that the chin represents female gynecology issues and different things. And all these people would get together and share their own personal data. And so actually had thousands of cases that all pointed the same way they were able to create. That was their research, of course. And I thought it was pretty dang good because how I research as well. I'm like, hey, this person and this person, I'm seeing all these common denominators. So I love that I didn't know this is where the conversation would go. I didn't even know how this all came to be, but I love hearing that. I'm also laughing on the inside because my oldest daughter was letting me know that she's in mammalogy this semester. And so one of her assignments is to go to the zoo and study how goats react to noises or to sounds. And so anyway, it cracks me up because we're talking about how we don't even talk about these voices or whatever, but look over here in animal research. They're
on it.
How we respond to sound, which is just, I'm sure, totally, completely 100% different, but I love it. Okay, so we talked about the psychology of voice. We talked about the 7 layers of sound in every voice. You talked about how those first 6 layers are voice masks. And then the last one is this authentic voice. And so you help people bring out this authenticity so they are aligned, so they're not essentially, and it's hard to put your finger on, but we've all been in this scenario, if you think about it, where it's like something was just off about that person. Or you can think about, I think a more visceral or tangible example is, can you think of someone who's ever lit up the room, right, when they walked in a little bit? And there's an energy to it, right? But the voice is also welcoming, warm, et cetera. And so we can understand those pieces. Yeah. So we've all experienced and interacted with the psychology of voice. So we talked about how that last layer is the authentic one, and then there's those other 5 pieces in between. And then that there's also one of these 5 wounds overall, kind of fueling every voice in general. Okay. And that was a lot of some of our conversation about psychology of voice, et cetera. And then we talked about a couple examples, the cheerleader mask, and then that peacekeeper, people pleaser, which I love both of those examples. And so that brings me to thinking about how this has happened for you, how you came into this and how you kicking and screaming move forward. You had lots of people kind of sharing with you, wow, Tracy, this might be your, maybe they didn't use these words, but zone of genius. It reminds me of interviewing Gay Hendricks about, I think that's his name. He's an older gentleman. And I remember his book really was vindicating and a little bit life-changing for me because he talked about how we would so commonly live in our zone of excellence forever and just die half miserable, right? Instead of our zone of genius. But that makes me think about that being the legacy overall. And so I want to ask you about, okay, Tracy, we've got this psychology of voice, and it's almost like this. It's hard to even summarize. In some ways, we can summarize it, right? It's like this authenticity switch that we can turn on. But it's really, there's a lot of really cool opportunity here. So I'm asking, what is this? And you may not know the answer to this question, but I can't help but ask you, what does the legacy of Tracy Goodwin look like? How are we going to harness the psychology of voice, or are we going to lose all the data and the work and whatnot that you have collected over these years or maybe even decades?
Yeah, no pressure.
Sorry about this question. It was like, maybe this is not an on-air
No,
question.
it's a great question.
You don't have to know the answer.
No,
right?
I do.
That's a good question. Okay, great.
Well, and because I hit 50 and everything changed. I started realizing there was only one of me. Now, does this mean that are there people in the world that can hear like I can? And there's billions of people in the world. I'm not saying I'm the only one, I'm special. I'm not saying that at all. But I don't know of anyone that can hear like I hear that certainly made their entire existence about creating this. Then 60 hit. And I realized just from the information, just from the comments that I get from people, it was always in process. I always knew that, okay, I really have to leave this body of work. My focus had been really up until probably around 56, 57. I just have to touch every life that I'm here to touch. And what does that look like right now? I am very much moving into the phase of moving my ear out of this and moving this into a system, whatever you want to call it, a system, a course, a program. The gold standard is what I like to think of it as in schools, in corporations, in judicial systems, and beyond, because I can only imagine what the world would be like if we didn't carry the weight of the way we've been spoken to. And in that process, learn to speak to people differently. So I'm very aggressively right now creating a program that is the methodology, that is supported by the research and data, that has my ear removed from it. And then we're hopefully in 2026 going to be bringing this, introducing it to schools, piloting it. I do a lot of work with companies. So I already know, I've already got 10 years of knowing it works. And it works in leadership, and it works in productivity, and it works in relationships. And I know all of that. So now it's really just about the packaging and the marketing of it, because it is a legacy and I want to leave it behind. I don't want it to go when I go.
Yeah. And I think there's so many right answers to that, right? How do we take that framework or methodology or whatever, right? And so it's actually a fun question. It's like,
Yeah.
how do we help this live on beyond me? And that's honestly a great question for anyone who's done a body of work, right? That's worth passing on. And it's a great question to continue to ask ourselves. And sometimes the answer may look different. Maybe it starts as one thing and it becomes something else. And I guess we'll be finding out on the other side. But how cool to be pioneering an area that touches us all, and yet no one's really doing research around it so much so far. So it's like it's like the pioneer in this field overall, which is pretty cool. So I'm pretty lucky.
It's really cool. I feel honored to have fought doing this work when I was younger so hard. I'm so honored that I have this gift, and it's really powerful in so many ways, because you're right. Voice touches everything. It touches every part of our life, every piece of it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so fun to think about what that could look like and how it could potentially spread or be shared. And that's the thing. It's if in some iteration, imagine the beauty of I think about that man who was trying to prove something to his dad, and that could have taken him a year of therapy to pull out.
Yeah.
And yet, if you don't have something rising to the surface, you can't work through it. And so even though it was affecting him in the here, now, right now, where he wasn't able to make sales, it was really affecting so many other parts of his life as well. And it was just a part that needed healing. And I don't have any idea, but I would imagine sometimes, and maybe it was very natural for you, you almost felt unequipped for some of the things that you could read on people. They were like, oh my gosh, how did you know so many things about me? You learned a lot.
You have no idea. You have no idea.
I did not know I was going to crack open these shells. That felt like therapeutic things. And that I want to offer as well. That's a lot of space to hold, and it can be quite challenging. And I think that's actually the case for your scenario is unique, but there are many people that work with people. I think about we're in health spaces. And so I think about a lot of health practitioners. And I don't think we can undermine you need to have some capacity to be able to hold space like that. And there was different things that you said. It was so interesting. I always used to call myself a chameleon. Like I would adjust to the environment I was in, right? And I don't know, I just think about how we might use this work or how it translates into all these different spaces and places.
Yeah.
Tracy, where can people find you online?
I am Captivate the Room everywhere but LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, I'm Tracy A. Goodwin, but otherwise, Captivate the Room, captivatetheroom.com. That's where you can find me.
Thank you so much for coming on today and for sharing about the psychology of voice, letting us know that we all have something at the top, some middle layers, and then a very authentic one underneath. For now, until Tracy's legacy is more available to us all, we'll be prying away the layers to try to find our most authentic selves. Thank you so much for coming on and for enlightening us that this is even a thing. So I appreciate that.
Thanks for having me.
Bones, but they just keep breaking.